to um, Mr. Oh God, I've just lost it, Roper, to how do they
It's all right.
make whiskey, grain to glass, aging process, etc. So let me stop sharing that and take it away. You there?
All good? I'm
Yep,
here.
there you go. You're
All
good.
right. So this gets pretty scientific. We won't go super deep on this, but the main thing back to those baking ingredients on how they make whiskey is they're basically picking grains. What they call a lot of them are called cereal grains. So you've got rye, wheats, barleys, um, corn. So you're just taking those grains, and what you have to do is you're trying to get the sugar out of them. So you have to basically malt them or get them wet in a sense, and you're just kind of soaking them so that they actually sprout or force the sugar to come out. And then you're going to mash them, which basically you're going to make your recipe with them, and you're heating them as you're doing this into a fermentation. I'm not going to get too deep here, but you're basically, if you've ever seen or been to a distillery, they make a big vat, and these fermenters is what they're called, and they just kind of cook, and the alcohol is just kind of bubbling off of them, bubbling, and you're slowly just making what you would call like your batter if you're baking. So that's where you're going to ferment, and then you distill it. So that's where you're going to have the stills, is what they call, and you're basically just putting them under heat so that you can separate all that water and all those other congeners and ingredients out, and you're basically distilling off that alcohol. Now, obviously, the flavor is going to come with it, but that's why you always have those tall stills or those pot stills where it comes up, because as you heat it, the alcohol will evaporate first, and you're collecting that. If you guys ever picture the old school moonshine videos where they're slowly collecting that white whiskey off of the still, that's basically it. So once they do that, the most important part to me is the actual aging of the whiskey. So it's all whiskey, just like vodka or anything else, is clear. Start white. If you've ever had moonshine, that's basically it. It's just white. That's just white corn whiskey. But all whiskey is going to start white, and then they age them in barrels. Aging is super important because that's kind of where the master distiller gets to choose and pick, kind of the flavors he wants. Does he want a lot of char in that barrel? Does he want it to age for 2 years? Does he want it to age for 10 years? Slowly that barrel is kind of what's flavoring that whiskey. And that's another great thing to know when you're shopping is the ages of whiskey. You'll see in a lot of different whiskeys. I'll try to show you kind of a younger and an older here. I think you'll be able to see them. See if I can. That get the light through it. So you can see the difference in the color on these. So only thing, now remember, there's no color we can add on these. These are both American bourbons. So the difference in that color is that barrel. So if you're shopping and you see something like this that's lighter and there's no age on it, that's probably between 2-4 years. And as you get to those darker colors, you're looking at that 8 to 12 year range. And then obviously whiskey can go all the way up to 23 years. You'll see a lot of people pay a ton of money for whiskeys that are between 18 and 23 years. If you ask most master distillers what their favorite age of a whiskey is, though, it's between 8 and 12 years. So I always tell people, don't overpay just because it's older. It's not like Scotch. Most profiles that taste great with bourbon here in America are right in that 8 to 12 year range. You can find some great ones on the shelf for $30. So that's kind of the aging process. The cool thing about the barrels is it's kind of folklore. I'll tell you one little story about them. It wasn't necessarily that we put whiskey into barrels in America to figure out like, oh, this is going to make them taste great. We put them in there to store. So we were storing whiskey as we were shipping it down the river, probably down the Mississippi, down to Kentucky, or from Kentucky down to New Orleans. And the reason they charred the barrel at first was because they probably, the folklore is they either had fish in those barrels or rusty nails. And they basically needed a container, and they needed some way to clean it, get the smell out, get that thing as sanitized as possible. So they burnt out the barrels, put their white whiskey in there to ship it to New Orleans downriver. And by the time it got downriver, people in New Orleans fell in love with, wow, this is amazing. And it's got caramel in it. It's got vanilla now. And it's got a little bit of color to it. So it's pretty neat to see that almost in an accident, we've created what now is our bourbon here in America just by charring and cleaning out our barrels. So kind of unique. The aging is very important. There's two things when you ask someone if you're ever trying a new whiskey. I always tell someone, ask them what that mash bill is, right? The recipe, because that'll kind of give you a heads up of what's coming. And then ask what the age is. A lot of bottles now don't have age statements on them anymore. So you're either going to get probably two categories. There's that 8 to 12 range, or there's that 2 to 4 range. The 2 to 4 range, you'll see more in that $10 to $20. The 8 to 12, you'll see in that $30 to $50 range on bourbon. And that's kind of the process. So I'll kick it back to you there. Talking on the news, kick it back to you.
I have a question. I actually went to Maker's Mark, where they make it in Kentucky. And so there was this huge vat of mush. Is that the mash you were talking about?
So that's the fermenting. So that's where they're taking that mash and they're setting it in there. And basically what they're putting in there is yeast, and that yeast is it's eating at the sugars. So if you saw, like, depending on, they might have showed you a couple, the ones they start to get really foamy because it's live, really basically. Tasty. And they leave them open like that, and that yeast is eating all that sugar, and by eating the sugar, it's creating alcohol.
Uh-oh, did we lose him? Did we lose you, Brad? You there?
Uh-oh, am I here? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. You're just sort of coming in and out there. So then, really the difference, obviously, is the aging. What other, besides, vanilla, caramel, whatever, what other things do they do to set themselves apart from a different bourbon or whatever? Besides aging.
So the new thing, am I coming through good?
Uh-huh.
Okay. The newest thing is different, what they call cask finishes or barrel finishes. So everybody's looking for something unique. So they're taking old cognac barrels or sherry wine barrels, or you can see all kinds of stuff with different Armagnacs or even absinthe barrels. So what they're doing is they're taking their whiskey to a certain age, but whiskey's become so popular, everybody's looking for something new. So they might I'll show you one here. I'll just show you the box, but this guy here is just finished off in rum cask. So you're going to add in all those rum sugars in there, that more molasses taste. It's not for everyone. It's funny because every time when a new cask finish comes out, people love it or hate it. But it's a good way too if you want to get into the category and you're a rum drinker. That's going to taste a little bit more like rum to you. And you can see different finishes, and then different distillers have different styles. So pretty neat.
Very cool. Does anybody have any questions out there? Do you guys have any questions? Feel like I'm asking all the questions. All right.
What's the difference between single barrel?
That's our next category. Hold tight 1 minute. I'll tell you.
Okay.
And yes, this is my house. Don't break in, please. I don't live around you. I saw it in the chat.
That is very, very nice setup back there.
This is what 7 years in the liquor industry will do to you.
All right.